They told me I'd only be here for a few days, just until the bathroom remodel was done. Lucas said, "You know how messy construction gets. Mama," he added, wrapping my scarf around my shoulders like I was made of porcelain. Chiara hovered in the background, smiling too hard, holding a bag she insisted I didn't need to pack myself. "Just your sketchbook and some socks," she chirped. "You'll be painting again in no time." They dropped me off at 10:43 a.m. on a Tuesday. I remember the time because I'd glanced at the clock on my phone right before Chiara took it to charge it properly. I remember the nurse too. He was kind in that shallow, preoccupied way of people who have 12 other things to do. "Welcome, Signora Delia," he said as if I had made a reservation. I'm not unfamiliar with medical buildings. My husband, Giovanni, spent the last 3 months of his life in one, but this was different. The air here didn't smell of sterile floors and hopeful families. It smelled like boiled peas and bleach, like something permanent. My name was misspelled on the chart at the front desk, Dedalia, instead of Delia. It clung there, like a careless insult. But I didn't say anything. Not yet. I was shown to a shared room. Beige walls, a vinyl curtain pulled between beds, and a small window looking out onto a patch of grass, guarded by a chain-link fence. A woman lay in the other bed, her face turned toward the wall. She never moved. Her television was on, volume low, displaying a muted soap opera. No one was watching. They said I could rest, and left me with a tray of mashed potatoes and lukewarm milk. By 2 p.m., I began to understand what had happened. There was no scheduled pickup time. The front desk had no departure date listed. A woman from intake came to evaluate my cognitive ability. She asked me to spell world backward. I asked if she could spell respect. She smiled like I was being difficult. At dinner, I sat in the common room with 8 other people. Some of them stared at their food like it was a puzzle. One man, tall, silver-bearded, wearing 2 different socks, told me he used to play the violin at La Scala. He held his spoon like a bow and mimed Tchaikovsky while oatmeal clung to the corners of his mouth. After dinner, a nurse came to give me a little paper cup of pills. "I don't take anything at night," I said. She looked surprised. "Your chart says otherwise." I insisted. She hesitated, then walked off to double-check. She never came back. That night, I lay in a narrow bed with stiff sheets and a thin blanket. My knees ached from the cold air seeping in through the sealed windows. I turned my head and saw my roommate's eyes open now, fixed on the ceiling, unblinking. I whispered a prayer and turned away. When the lights went out at 9 hours, I cried silently into my pillow. It was the kind of cry that didn't make noise, just pressure, like grief was trying to push out of my pores. The ceiling above me had a long crack down its center. I watched it until my eyes dried out. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I asked to call my son. "Phones are kept at the desk," the nurse said, not unkindly. "Your family left instructions not to disturb them unless it's an emergency." I asked what qualified as an emergency. "A fall," she replied. "Chest pain. Loss of consciousness." I smiled, sharp and bitter. "What about betrayal?" She blinked. "Man, I suppose that doesn't make the list," I said, and walked away. At breakfast, I sat next to a woman named Antonella, who'd worked as a schoolteacher for 30 years. Her hands trembled as she held her spoon. "My daughter brought me here for a week while she moved apartments," she said, eyes unfocused. "That was 3 summers ago." I believed her. When I returned to my room, I looked for my bag, the one Chiara had packed. It was sitting on a plastic chair. Neatly folded inside were exactly 3 items: 1 pair of socks, my old acrylic paintbrushes, snapped in half, and a worn apron with blue and yellow streaks across the chest, dried from the last painting I never finished. No sketchbook, no wallet, no ID, not even my wedding ring. I sat on the edge of the bed, letting the weight of it settle. They'd planned this. Luca and Chiara. They'd wrapped it in silk words and paper smiles, but underneath, it was a shove. Not into a room, but out of their lives, neatly, efficiently, with just enough plausible kindness to tell themselves they did it for my sake. At noon, the head nurse came in with a clipboard and asked if I was settling in. I asked if I could step outside for a walk. She said I could use the courtyard at scheduled times with supervision. I asked if I could get my phone. She said she'd check with administration. Then she looked down at her clipboard. Oh, and we'll need to confirm your next of kin. Is it still your son, Luca? I paused. Not anymore. She looked up. I'm sorry? I smiled. Just mark it as undecided for now. She nodded, uncertain, and backed out of the room. When she left, I stood up and took the apron from the bag. I slipped it over my cardigan like armor. My scarf was still tucked in the front pocket, folded small. I pulled it out, ran my fingers along the stitches, then wrapped it around my neck. The sun poured through the small window behind me, illuminating the cracked ceiling and the dull green walls. But in that moment, something inside me settled, not in defeat, but in decision. If this was the chapter they wanted me to end in, they should have made sure I didn't remember how to write. You don't realize you're fading until you're halfway gone. Not into death, but into invisibility. It doesn't happen all at once. It creeps. First, they stop asking for your opinion. Then they stop waiting for your answer. Eventually, your presence becomes assumed, like wallpaper, decorative, silent, unmoving. When I moved in with Luca and Chiara, it wasn't out of desperation. It was supposed to be temporary. That word again. We used it like a bandage. Just until things settle. Just until we get through the year. Just until Sophia starts school. Giovanni had only been gone 8 months. 42 years, we were married. We shared a life, a studio, a rhythm. He always said, "You paint the color, I'll stretch the canvas." And he did. Literally. He built every frame I ever worked on, even when his hands started shaking from age. When he passed, my hands stopped too. The apartment we had lived in, our top-floor nest in the San Frediano quarter, was too quiet without him. It had uneven floors and smelled of lemon polish and turpentine. My grief echoed off every corner. Luca visited twice in those first few weeks. He brought Sophia once, who clung to my scarf like it was a blanket. "She misses you," he said. "Come live with us for a while. Chiara's finally going back to work. We could use an extra hand." They made space for me. At first, a small room downstairs with its own little terrace. Chiara painted it dove gray and hung lace curtains. There was a shelf for my sketchbooks, a narrow table for my brushes. She even bought me a small easel from IKEA, the kind that wobbles if you press too hard. Still, I thanked her. I started cooking again. Not for passion, but for duty. Roasted fennel. Parmigiana. Chiara said she was trying to cut gluten. So I learned to make almond flour biscotti. I folded laundry while Sophia napped. Dusted the bookshelf even when no one noticed. But some things did shift. The first was the mailbox key. I used to get the mail while walking back from the market. One day, it wasn't in its dish. I asked. Chiara said she'd moved it to avoid confusion. Later, the power bill came addressed only to Luca and Chiara Bianchi. My name had vanished from the documents, not crossed out, not erased, just never there to begin with. Then came the passwords. Our shared Netflix login was suddenly changed. The Wi-Fi password no longer worked on my tablet. When I asked, Chiara said they were tightening things up. I told myself they were young, distracted, overwhelmed, but a part of me, the part that watched Giovanni's hands tremble as he screwed in a hinge on my last frame, knew what it really was. A quiet retreat, a turning inward, a house shrinking around me, wall by wall. Luca wasn't cruel, not exactly, but he was efficient. That's what scared me most. How quickly he adapted to this new equation, mother equals variable support, not person, not artist, not equal, just a presence to manage. I remember one Saturday afternoon, Chiara was out, Luca upstairs. I sat in the garden and began sketching the olive tree that leaned over the fence. Sophia came out with her juice and asked, "Nonna, can I draw too?" I gave her my extra pencil and we sat together, sun warming our shoulders. She drew the sun as a cat and said, "Because it watches." That moment should have lasted forever. But then Chiara came out and said, "Sophia, inside, that table's not clean." And just like that, the spell broke. Later that night, Luca asked me not to leave art supplies outside anymore. "The paint gets into the patio tiles," he said. "Chiara's worried about stains." I stopped sketching after that. The next month, I offered to pay part of the mortgage. My pension wasn't large, but Giovanni had left me a small policy. Luca smiled, like it was a gift he didn't expect, but had already planned to unwrap. Really, Mama, that would help a lot. I wrote the check. Chiara said she'd file the paperwork to update the title for formality. I never saw it. My birthday came and went, without candles. Chiara was on a work trip. Luca texted me, "Buon compleanno," from the car. Sophia made me a card with a potato on the front. "It's you," she said, "because potatoes are soft and warm." I nearly cried. That winter, I got sick. Nothing serious, just a chest infection. But I was too tired to argue when Chiara brought me a tablet and asked me to sign some insurance updates. She hovered over me as I scrawled my name. I remember thinking, I should read this. But my breath was shallow and I just wanted to lie down. I never saw that paper again. And slowly, the home became theirs. The bookshelf filled with Chiara's wellness books. The spare closet where I kept my frames now held Sophia's old toys. One day, I opened the kitchen drawer where I kept Giovanni's bottle opener, the old brass one shaped like a fish, and found it replaced by a sleek stainless steel one. No one told me, they just did. One night, I found Chiara crying quietly at the dining table. Her hands were buried in a stack of mail. She said nothing when I walked in. The next morning she was cheerful again. "We're thinking of refinancing," she said. "Interest rates are good." I nodded. She kissed my cheek too quickly. The seed had already been planted. The following week, they told me about the spa facility. Chiara said it had art therapy. Luca said the air would be better for my lungs. "It's just for a bit," he said, rubbing my shoulder. "We want you to feel your best." And I believed him. I packed my scarf and brushes. I trusted their smiles. I let them drive me. I didn't know they were driving me away from everything I had left. There's a rhythm to places like this. Soft wheels on linoleum, automated bed alerts, trays that slide without ceremony onto tables. The days here don't unfold, they loop. Mornings bleed into evenings. Time flat. 3 days passed before I was allowed in the courtyard. The nurse, Claudia, seemed new, young, and eager, still smiling like she hadn't learned to guard her face yet. She wheeled out another woman first, then looked at me. "Delia, you asked to see the garden." "Yes." I nodded, not because I needed fresh air, but because I needed proof of life beyond beige walls and flickering fluorescence. The courtyard was a narrow rectangle, boxed in by tall concrete and bordered with planters full of overwatered geraniums. The sky was visible, but not wide. Still, it was something. I sat on the only bench that wasn't cracked and pulled the scarf tighter around my neck. The air smelled faintly of bleach and overripe earth. Across from me, the woman in the wheelchair blinked slowly into the sun. Unmoved, and that's when I noticed the camera. Mounted high in the corner, partially hidden by a rusted awning, watching, always. I kept my posture relaxed, but my fingers tensed around the edge of my apron. They'd placed me somewhere they could monitor, somewhere I couldn't call anyone, somewhere where forgetting would be easy. But I hadn't forgotten. That night, I asked for a list of medications I was supposedly taking. The nurse looked surprised. "You're on standard care," she said. "Just vitamins, anti-inflammatories, mood stabilizers." She paused when I raised an eyebrow. "It's all routine." "I want the printout," I said, "and I want to know who prescribed them." She smiled politely. "We'll need approval from your emergency contact." I almost laughed. My emergency contact was the person who put me here. Instead, I went back to my room and sat with my arms crossed, counting the minutes between hallway footsteps. My roommate still hadn't spoken. I'd learned her name, Elsa, from the sticker on her pill organizer. Her eyes tracked movement, but her lips stayed parted in a quiet absence. At night, I listened to her breathing, shallow, steady, mechanical. The next morning, my toothbrush was missing. I asked for it at the front desk. They said they'd check with cleaning. That afternoon, my robe disappeared, the one with the tiny stitched roses that Giovanni gave me our last Christmas together. I'd folded it carefully under my pillow. "Gone." "You probably misplaced it," a nurse said. "Things get moved during laundry rounds." "I never submitted it for laundry." She gave a soft shrug, the kind that ends conversations. They were chipping away, piece by piece. I began cataloging everything, mentally, at first. Then in a small notebook I borrowed from the activity room, when no one was looking, I kept it tucked under the mattress, noting dates, names, items, quotes. My mind wasn't slipping, it was sharpening. Every Thursday, a woman named Morella visited a resident down the hall. She wore gray linen trousers and carried a brown satchel with worn corners. Something about her reminded me of the real world. Coffee shops, train stations, city sidewalks, life beyond these walls. I watched her every time she passed. On her fourth visit, I waited near the lobby with a magazine I had no intention of reading. When she walked by, I said, "Scusi, hai un secondo." She paused, glancing at the nurse nearby, then stepped closer. "I need help," I whispered, shifting my scarf like I was adjusting it. "Not medical, not physical, legal." She tilted her head. "Legal? My son locked me in here using a power of attorney I don't remember signing. I need to prove I'm of sound mind." She hesitated. "I'm not a lawyer, but you know one." A long silence. She studied my face. I didn't look away. Then she nodded once. "I'll be back," she said. And just like that, a thread of hope slipped into the suffocating loop. That night, I didn't cry. The next morning, Luca called. It was the first time I'd heard his voice since the day he left me here. A staff member wheeled in a tablet on a rolling stand and adjusted the screen so his smiling face filled the frame. "Mama," he said warmly, "you look well. Better than you expected?" His smile tightened. "Just checking in." "You told them I had dementia." He blinked. "Mama, don't start. You told them I couldn't manage my own affairs. You were disoriented. You didn't even remember your insurance card." "I was sick," I said. "Not broken." He sighed and leaned back. "We did this for your safety." "No," I said, my voice clear and steady. "You did it for your convenience." He frowned. "Don't turn this into something dramatic. I was an artist, a mother, a wife. I'm not a burden. You're being emotional." I smiled, sweet as arsenic. "You haven't seen emotional yet." He disconnected. The nurse gently wheeled the stand away without comment. Later that day, I sat in the courtyard again. The sun was lower this time, and the shadows of the fence stretched long across the pavement. Morella didn't come, but I imagined she would. And I wasn't going to wait forever. Tomorrow, I'd start pretending to forget things, just enough to make them underestimate me, just enough to move unseen. I'd ask for paper during art therapy. I'd sketch out my legal rights if I had to. I'd find the holes in their system. They locked me in, thinking they'd silenced the woman I used to be. But I remember how to mix red from yellow and violet. I remember how to finish a painting no one else believed in. And I remember every door that's ever been shut in my face right before I opened it myself. There's a difference between being forgotten and being removed. One fades you from the frame, the other tears you out. I woke up with that thought. The sky outside my window was pale and empty, the kind of colorless morning that feels dishonest. I sat up slowly, hand on the wall to steady myself. Elsa, my silent roommate, was still asleep, her breath mechanical, steady as a metronome ticking down someone else's time. At breakfast, I asked for my file. "Just my patient notes," I told the nurse, smiling softly. "I like knowing what others know about me." She chuckled, like I'd made a joke, and said she'd check with admin. I already knew they wouldn't give it to me, but the request planted something. A message. She's paying attention. In the art room, I asked for watercolors. The therapist, a cheerful woman with hummingbird earrings, handed me a tray with 10 dry cakes of color and a brush that had lost half its bristles. Still, I thanked her and took a seat near the window. I painted nothing of beauty, just marks. Quick lines, letters, shapes. A house divided down the middle. A name, Delia Bianchi. A question, competent? I folded the paper and slipped it into my apron. That afternoon, Morella returned. She didn't approach me directly. Instead, she wandered the hallway, speaking softly to the man in 2B, who thought she was his niece, but I saw her glance in my direction. Twice. On the third pass, she dropped something as she walked, an envelope. I bent to pick it up when she'd turned the corner. Inside, a folded paper with scribbled notes. "You signed a full POA in March, while on antibiotics and cough syrup. Property transferred to your son's name 3 weeks ago. Legal grounds possible, but need clarity. Will help." My hands trembled as I refolded the page. They didn't just confine me, they erased me, on paper, in records, from my own home. That night, I didn't eat. I laid on the stiff bed staring up at the ceiling tile with the hairline crack. My chest didn't burn with anger. It hummed with purpose. They wanted me, passive. That was the mistake. I remembered everything. I remembered the notary Chiara, brought in with a clipboard and a mild cologne that stung my throat. I remembered the moment she told Sophia to turn the TV louder in the next room. I remembered my own fingers shaking as I signed a simple update. She'd said it was about hospital logistics. I was wearing the robe they'd now stolen from me. And I remembered how she smiled when I signed the last page. Not kindly, but relieved. The next morning, I asked for my scarf. The nurse looked confused. "You're wearing it," she said. I shook my head. "My other one. The green silk one, in my bag." She promised to check, but didn't return. I wasn't looking for scarves. I was creating a list. Every object removed. Every name changed. Every denial. A full catalog of erosion. In the courtyard, I saw the old gardener pushing his rusted cart. He didn't speak English, just nodded often, and muttered to his trowel, but I greeted him anyway. "Buongiorno," I said. He looked up. "Troppo caldo oggi. È sempre troppo qualcosa." He laughed softly, shook his head, and kept moving. I scribbled down a quick note on the back of a paper napkin and folded it into a triangle. "Puoi dar questo alla signora con la borsa marrone. Per favore," I whispered. He looked at it, then at me. I pressed it gently into his palm. His fingers closed. Later that day, I found my toothbrush in a supply closet, taped to a box labeled expired lotions. I didn't feel victorious. I felt documented. They want me off balance. I made another note. At group therapy, we were told to draw what safety means to you. Most people made flowers, houses, dogs. I drew a lockbox. Inside it, I drew a miniature version of myself holding a key. When the therapist came around, she asked me, "What's that behind the lock?" I looked her in the eye. "Memory." She smiled, like I was being poetic. But I wasn't. I was warning her. After dinner, I feigned dizziness and asked to return to my room early. Once inside, I pulled the blanket tight and waited. At 8:12 p.m., Morello appeared at the door, dressed in scrubs, not her usual clothes, hospital-issued navy, but I recognized the satchel under her arm. She tapped once and slipped inside. "I have 7 minutes," she whispered. "Then I won't waste them." She pulled out 3 folded documents. One was a printout of my title transfer, another, the POA form, from March. The third was a letter typed, dated, signed, stating my mental fitness from a physician I hadn't seen in 5 years. "They sent this to your insurance," she said, "to justify the placement." I scanned the line at the bottom. "Patient shows increased confusion and cannot reliably manage her finances or medication. Placement recommended for safety." My vision blurred, not from tears but from fury. "I want to fight this." "You can," she said, "but we need evidence. Voice memos, copies, witnesses. You're not just proving who you are, you're disproving what they've written. I have notes, a full timeline, incidents, conversations. I've kept track." She raised her eyebrows. "You kept a ledger?" "Giovanni was a carpenter. I painted, but we both knew structure is everything." Morella smiled, something almost proud. "Then we began." She handed me a burner phone. "Tiny, outdated, perfect. Only text me on this," she said. "No calls. Hide it well. If they find it, you never saw me." I nodded. As she left, I tucked the phone into the hollow back of a travel-size shampoo bottle. Then I turned off the light and stared into the dark until my eyes adjusted. They thought this was the end of the story. They forgot who taught Luca how to hold a pencil. They forgot who painted the murals at his elementary school with her own hands. They forgot I was still holding the brush. The day started with overcooked eggs and a paper napkin folded into the shape of a swan. A volunteer had been teaching origami to the breakfast shift nurses, and now each tray came with a new animal. Mine looked like a bird that had flown into a window. Still, I placed it gently on my nightstand, beside the dented plastic cup and the forgotten hand lotion. Elsa was still asleep. Or pretending. Sometimes I wasn't sure. I hadn't slept well. Morella's visit had replayed in my mind all night like a record with a scratch. Her voice, calm but urgent. The word erased still burned behind my eyes. What kind of son files paperwork to declare his mother incompetent before she finishes mourning her husband? What kind of mother lets him? That thought caught me, hooked me. I sat back against the wall and let it dig in. I'd raised Luca better than this. Or I thought I had. I taught him to hold a pencil, then how to draw shadows. I made him write thank you notes, memorize his grandmother's recipes. I ironed his shirts before his first job interview. I drove him to the police station the day he broke the neighbor's mailbox with a baseball bat. Not to scold him, but to make him apologize. He cried the whole way there. Now he doesn't cry. He files. I stood up and paced the room, quietly. My slippers made no sound. That used to be a blessing, silent steps in a house with a sleeping child. Now it felt like disappearing one shuffle at a time. At 10 Zarin, I was scheduled for memory therapy. It was really just a polite term for guided humiliation. A woman with laminated cards asked me to identify presidents and household objects and recall the name of the dog in the picture she'd shown me 30 minutes earlier. The dog was named Buttons, I remembered. But I said Biscotto, just to watch her write something on her clipboard. After, I asked for a moment alone in the art room. The therapist allowed it, likely thinking it part of my treatment. I took a blank page, opened a dry paint tin, and used the brush to swirl dull blue circles across the paper. Then I wrote one sentence beneath them. They think quiet means gone. When I returned to my room, my robe had been moved again. This time it was neatly folded on Elsa's chair. A subtle reminder, nothing here is yours. Not even what I ate lunch without tasting it. Soup that could have been anything. I stared out the window as the gardener clipped the same bush he'd trimmed yesterday. The courtyard looked clipped and controlled, like everything else. By early afternoon, my body started to feel the weight of it. Not just the betrayal, but the absence of Giovanni, of home, of rhythm. My hands ached from doing nothing. My mind ran too fast for a place built to slow people down. I sat on my bed and picked up the bird. The paper crackled softly as I unfolded it. The creases remained like ghost wings. That's when the grief hit, not like a scream, but like water soaking slowly through cotton. I pulled out the sketch I'd hidden in my apron. It was smudged now, the lines imperfect. Still, I could see the structure of my old home drawn in soft pencil, the shutters Giovanni painted himself, the crooked tile above the front door, the little lemon tree we planted the year Luca started school. I'd drawn it from memory, not because I missed it, but because I wanted to prove to myself it was real, that it wasn't just nostalgia coloring a false picture. But now, staring at it, I wasn't sure. That house didn't belong to me anymore. On paper or in practice, Luca had taken it, piece by piece. The last conversation we had at that kitchen table was about olive oil brands. Tiara likes the filtered kind, he said. I just nodded, knowing full well we used to keep two kinds, filtered for guests, unfiltered for truth. I folded the drawing in half and set it under the mattress with the burner phone. Then I did something I hadn't done since Giovanni's funeral. I sat on the floor, knees creaking, back curled, and let myself break. Not loudly. Not even with tears. Just that cold, still feeling of being unmoored. For the first time, I let the word alone speak aloud in my body. I had no keys, no account access, no visitors on the books. I had been packaged like a parcel of old clothes and shelved here until further notice. And yet, there was a thread, a sliver of something left in my fingers. Morella's eyes, the gardener's nod, my own handwriting, intact. I traced the lines on my palm, remembering how Giovanni used to read them like maps. You'll live long, he'd joke. And he was right about one. The light outside began to soften. Late afternoon turned the walls gold and gray. The sound of clinking dishes floated in from the hallway, followed by soft laughter from the nurse's station. Elsa stirred for the first time all day and blinked at me. I nodded to her. Nice of you to join us, I said. She didn't respond, but she didn't turn away either. Maybe that was enough. I stood and dusted my palms. Dignity isn't always loud. Sometimes it's in the rising. And I wasn't done rising. The next morning, I woke with clarity, not hope. Hope had been peeled off me, slowly, like layers of wallpaper no one cared to restore. But clarity. Clarity was different. Clarity made decisions. Clarity picked locks. I dressed slowly. My hands moved with intention. Every button on my cardigan felt like a seal being fastened, not to hide me, but to hold me in place. I wrapped my scarf with a practiced flick, then tucked the burner phone inside the lining of my apron pocket. I'd stitched the hidden slit last night, using a needle borrowed from the crafts room and thread pulled from the hem of a napkin. The old skills come back, if you let them. Elsa stirred in her bed, but said nothing. She never did. I wondered who she had once been. A pianist? A midwife? A woman who also once trusted the wrong people with the rest of her life. Down the hallway, I smiled at the new receptionist. They'd rotated staff again. This one was younger, probably 20, maybe 22, still figuring out how to wear confidence without looking like she borrowed it from someone else. "Excuse me," I said gently, leaning forward. "Would you mind printing out a new copy of my emergency contact form? I want to add someone. My son, Luca, travels a lot. It makes sense to have a backup now." "Yes." She blinked, then nodded. "Of course. I just need to pull up your chart." I placed my palms flat on the counter. "Steady." "Thank you, Kara." She turned to her monitor. I counted in my head. 12 seconds, that's how long it took for her to walk to the printer and back. I wasn't planning to forge anything. I didn't need to, I just wanted to watch. Her screen was a mirror if you stood in the right place. I saw the tab open. Delia Bianchi, full POA on file. Medical POF. They had labeled me as property. She handed me the form, with a sticky note attached. "You can fill this out in your room if you prefer." I nodded. "You're very kind." I walked away, but I didn't return to my room. I went to the garden. It had rained overnight. The stone benches were still damp, but the sunlight was slicing through the gray with enough weight to dry the cold from the air. I sat on a bench near the edge of the courtyard and pulled the burner phone from my apron. No one else was there. Not yet. I opened a text and typed slowly. "Morella. I need the title. Original. Scan is not enough." Seconds later, the dots appeared. "I'll get it. Do not ask how. Just keep recording everything." "I need proof he moved the house illegally." "I have it, but the date is before the POA." I stared at that message. Before, meaning Luca had planned this even while pretending we were a family. While I was cooking, folding his daughter's laundry, brushing Tara's hair when she said her migraines were back, he'd already contacted a lawyer. He'd walked into the notary's office with my forged permission, sat down, and handed over our family home like it was a sack of unwanted linens. A nurse came outside, clipboard in hand. I tucked the phone back into my apron, stood up, and smiled. "I thought I'd get some fresh air before art therapy," I said. She smiled automatically. "Of course, it's a good day for it." She didn't see the anger beneath my skin. No one ever does, until it's too late. Inside, I asked to change my art time to the afternoon and requested to visit the library room instead. Just to look through some old newspapers, I told the activities coordinator. Sometimes reading about the world helps me remember what day it is. She was thrilled. I didn't care what she thought. In the library, I didn't touch a single newspaper. I moved to the back corner where the printer sat, unattended, and removed the laminated emergency fire escape map posted on the wall. On the back, I wrote out everything I had learned. Luca filed POA March 7. House deed transferred March 3. POA not legal. Timing proves intent. Form signed during illness. Witness questionable. Identity competency not verified. No psychiatric exam before placement. Then I folded the page and tucked it into a large print Agatha Christie novel. It was childish, maybe, but sometimes you have to play games to be taken seriously. At lunch, I kept quiet. Morella had said to record everything. I couldn't use my phone with people around, but I could write. I'd used to keep journals for each season, documenting the shade of light, the shape of clouds, how Giovanni's hands grew more brittle every spring. Now I was documenting silence. The way a room goes quiet when you enter, the way no one looks you in the eye, if they've decided you're already halfway gone. After lunch, I returned to the art room. The therapist asked if I'd like to try collage today. "It's tactile," she said. "It helps people feel." I nodded, and asked for scissors. While everyone else cut out shapes from travel magazines, I trimmed paper into narrow strips, like receipt tape. On each one, I wrote a name or phrase from my notes. POA, March, title date March, Luca Bianchi, signature. Delia Bianchi, cognitive status, stable. Then I glued them into the outline of a house. When I was done, I took a photo on the burner phone and sent it to Morella. Good, make them look. I want them to ask what it means. And when they do, you smile. I've always believed hands remember what the mind forgets. In the evening, after lights dimmed and the staff thinned out, I sat by the tiny table in our room and began folding again, only this time, not birds or boats. I folded records, paper copies. Morella had slid to me during her last visit, tucked between old envelopes and falsely cheerful pamphlets about elder wellness. She had started marking them with stars where the signatures didn't match. Luca's forgery wasn't even convincing, just confident. That's what makes liars dangerous. They lean on certainty more than skill. I had 5 full sheets now: the power of attorney, deed transfer, insurance memo, bank authorization, and an unsigned witness affidavit marked pending. 5 sheets too many for someone who never agreed to anything. I cut the pages into narrow halves, leaving headers visible, then wrapped them in a soft fabric square I'd stitched into the underside of my scarf. A habit from my younger days, when I used to hide wet paintbrushes from curious grandchildren. The scarf felt heavier after, but I wore it with pride. Elsa watched me from bed, her eyes tracing my movement without comment. She'd become my quiet shadow, never interfering, never judging, just a constant witness. I often wondered what she held inside, what words piled up against the dam of her silence. I tapped my finger twice against my scarf as I turned off the lamp. Our secret. The next morning, I waited until the breakfast cart reached the far hallway. Then I made my move. I took the burner phone into the bathroom, locked the door, and opened the audio recording app. I pressed record and let the silence breathe. Then, speaking clearly, I began. My name is Delia Bianchi. Today is the 15th of the month. I am of sound mind and memory. This is a record of what has been done to me by my son, Luca Bianchi, and his wife, Chiara. I detailed every step when the documents were signed, what my condition was, how I'd been isolated. I described the nurses who gaslit, the missing belongings, the fake dementia claims. I spoke without hesitation, letting my voice anchor what the paperwork tried to dissolve. When I finished, I saved the file as DB Truth. Gen 1. It would not be the last. Later I disguised it as an audio journal for therapy. That's how I explained it. When a nurse asked what I was working on, they told me to try processing verbally, I said, with a wistful smile. Easier than talking to the mirror. She nodded, with mild sympathy. Already bored. I knew I was running out of quiet space. The staff wasn't suspicious yet, but I could feel the attention sharpening. My name was being passed more often between shift changes. The cheerful tones had acquired an edge. Too sweet, too careful. They thought I was unraveling, and that worked in my favor. In the mailroom, I asked the assistant if I could send a small package to a friend. Just some old drawings, I explained. Before they throw them out during inventory, the assistant, an overworked man named Pietro, barely looked up as I handed him a padded envelope addressed to Morella's contact. Inside were copies of everything. Originals stayed with me, hidden, but these scans would reach the lawyer, my backup, my insurance against silence. By lunch, the envelope was out of my hands. And the fear that had sat in my stomach for days lightened, just slightly. But that's when something happened I hadn't planned for. Tiara came to visit. She arrived mid-afternoon, in a puff of cheap perfume, and more makeup than I remembered her wearing, even at her wedding. Her smile was wide, calculated, and her voice rang out unnaturally loud in the hallway. "Mama Delia," she called. I froze at the edge of the activity room. So did 2 nurses. No one moved at first. She walked toward me, with open arms. I didn't rise. I didn't reach. I stared. "Oh, don't be dramatic," she said with a laugh. "You haven't hugged me in months." "I haven't seen you in months," I replied. She perched beside me like a sparrow on a cold branch. Her hands folded tightly on her lap. Her fake joy faltered when no one echoed it. "I wanted to bring you something," she said, pulling out a pair of slippers. They were pink. Fluffy. Too small. Lucas said, "You might be cold here." "I'm not cold," I said. "But I do appreciate the thought." She leaned in, eyes narrowing. "You're causing problems." I turned to her slowly. "Am I? We know what you're doing. You've always liked control, but this is a step too far." "I signed nothing," I said. "I remember everything." Her face changed. "You're not well." I smiled softly. "Then you shouldn't fear what I say." She stood quickly. "You don't want to make this ugly, Delia." "It already is, Kara. You just forgot to sweep." She left, brisk and flustered, but not before noticing the scarf I clutched just a bit tighter than before. That night, I sat by the window and opened my sketchpad again. This time, I didn't draw a house or a collage. I drew a chessboard. My pawn had made its first capture. The days moved like chess pieces now, slow, deliberate, inevitable. After Chiara's surprise visit, the tone of the facility shifted subtly. The staff didn't say anything directly, but their eyes lingered longer. One nurse began bringing my medications, pre-crushed in applesauce. Another hovered near when I walked to the garden. It wasn't concern. It was containment. They'd been warned. I was a problem resident now. Let them think that. The morning after Chiara's visit, I brewed the strongest move I had, doubt. Not mine, theirs. Doubt, planted properly, spreads like rot beneath a polished floor. I waited for the shift change. That tender hour, when one set of caretakers leaves hurriedly and the next arrives groggy. I walked calmly to the front desk and asked to speak to the on-call doctor. "I've been experiencing blurred vision," I said gently. "And I'd like a cognitive reevaluation, just for clarity. It's been a while, and, well, things haven't felt quite right." The nurse raised her brows, surprised but not suspicious. "You want a psych eval?" I smiled faintly. "If I'm going to be labeled unfit, I'd rather the label be accurate. No?" She didn't laugh, but she nodded and noted the request. That was my gambit. I knew they wouldn't schedule the exam right away, but it would go into the records, and if any part of this went to court, that request would be time-stamped, evidence that I, Delia Bianchi, had voluntarily asked to be assessed. It meant something, more than people realize. That same afternoon, I slipped into the staff lounge during activity hour. A custodian named Roberto always left his cart nearby. From it, I borrowed a roll of green tape and a blank name label. Back in my room, I removed the framed certificate that hung over the dresser, some generic resident appreciation award with a gold border, and carefully opened the back. Inside, I tucked another folded copy of the deed transfer and a timeline written in my own hand. Then I sealed the frame again and labeled the bottom, Bianchi, D, personal property, do not discard. Elsa watched me as I placed it on her bedside table instead of mine. "No one ever checks your side," I murmured. "They think you're harmless." She blinked, slowly, then so slight I almost missed it. She nodded. It was the first gesture she'd made in weeks. I nearly wept, but there was no time. After dinner, I returned to the art room and requested a canvas. I told the therapist I wanted to try something larger, to feel the arm movement again. She gave me a look of mild encouragement mixed with the fear I might drop dead on the floor. I smiled. I painted something meaningless, abstract streaks of orange and cobalt. While everyone watched the colors swirl, I used the distraction to hide a micro SD card behind the wooden stretcher of the frame. The card contained voice recordings, scans, time-stamped notes. Morella had helped me compile it all. If they took the phone, I still had this. If they took everything, I'd still have the mind that created it. As I walked back to my room with the canvas in hand, a nurse offered to carry it for me. "No, thank you," I said. "It's my best work in years." She smiled politely. She didn't look closely. No one ever does. I hung the canvas above my bed. Let them think it was art therapy. The next day I found a note under my plate at breakfast. No envelope, just handwriting I recognized. Friday, 3:00 p.m. Courtyard bench, near fountain. You'll have 5 minutes. Mirella. I folded the note and ate my toast slowly. At precisely 258, I excused myself from bingo and walked toward the courtyard. I passed the nurse's station with a smile, muttered something about fresh air and indigestion. Outside, the sun was sharp, spring, leaning hard into summer. I sat at the bench, heart steady. Mirella arrived at 3:01, pushing a cart filled with succulents. She was dressed as one of the gardening volunteers now, hat, gloves, vest. I would have missed her entirely if I hadn't known to look. She knelt beside me, pretending to repot a jade plant. "You're on every watch list now," she said quietly. "But that's good, it means they're nervous. Did the title scan get through?" "Yes, and the lawyer agrees, it's invalid. The notary wasn't properly registered. She'd been flagged a year before for filing power of attorney papers without ID checks. So the POA can be revoked?" "With evidence, yes. But more importantly," she said, slipping a USB drive under the plant tray, "we found the sale listing. Luca's already put the house on the market." I felt the breath leave me. "He's selling it? Under his name?" "Yes, he'll try to liquidate it before any legal contest can start. If he gets the money first, it'll be harder to trace." I clenched my jaw. Not if the buyer hears from the real owner. "Exactly." She looked up at me then. "Delia, are you sure you want to go public with this?" I thought about the portrait of Giovanni still hanging in that living room, the one I painted the year he retired. I thought about the pantry shelf where I'd measured Luca's height in pencil marks, now scrubbed clean. "I don't want revenge," I said. "I want return." Mirella nodded. 5 minutes passed. She stood, adjusted the cart, and wheeled it away without another word. I stayed behind, listening to the fountain's trickle. My next move would not be small. The next morning, I woke to birdsong and an unusual stillness, the kind of stillness that comes right before an earthquake. I didn't rush. I braided the sides of my hair like I used to when Luca was small and feverish, too tired to sleep, unless I lay beside him humming the hymn of silence. I dressed in layers, apron over sweater, scarf tied with a firm knot. Not for warmth, for memory. Today needed remembering. After breakfast, I returned to the courtyard. No one followed. I walked the loop slowly, past the rose bushes and fake hummingbird feeder that hadn't fooled a single bird since spring began. I stopped at the far bench where Mirella had knelt the day before and slid the USB into the hidden pocket sewn beneath the wooden armrest. It was time to act like someone who owned her past, not just survived it. Back inside, I made my way to the rec room. There were 2 computers stationed by the wall, meant for email or digital puzzles. I asked to use one for a family message. The staff approved easily. No one fears a woman who knits between art therapy and applesauce. I logged into the email Mirella helped me create. From Delia Truth, 47, at Secure Mail, subject to whom it should concern. This is a legal notice from the rightful owner of the Bianchi residence at 42 Via Amadeo, Florence. The attached documents prove that the house was transferred without consent, with forged signatures and invalid POA authorization. I attached scans of the notary filing, a time-stamped request for psychiatric assessment, and Mirella's summary of the illegal listing. Then I sent the message to 4 addresses: the real estate agent selling the home, the notary's former supervisor, the buyers listed on the private inquiry Mirella ran, and the local ombudsman's office. Afterward, I cleared the browser, signed out, and walked away without looking back. This was not revenge, this was reclamation. An hour later, during watercolor hour, I saw the first ripple. A nurse approached, uncertain. "Signora Bianchi, the front desk received a call for you. Would you like to take it in private?" I nodded. Inside the empty visitation office, the landline phone sat on the desk, still off the hook. I lifted it slowly. "Hello? Delia." It was Luca. His voice was tight, strained, not with worry, no. Luca only worried about impressions. This was something else. Panic, maybe. Exposure. "What is it?" I asked flatly. "I just received a call from a lawyer. The house. It's under review now. What did you do?" "I told the truth," I said. He scoffed. "You're confused. That house was moved under the authority you gave me. We talked about this. You were sick. Remember?" "No, Luca. I was grieving. There's a difference. You don't understand what you're doing. You're tearing this family apart over some technicality. It's not a technicality when you steal from your mother." He paused. Then his voice dropped. "You'll regret this." "No, Luca. You will." I hung up. My hand trembled, not with fear, but with rage, so clean it almost gleamed. That night, I wrote my first real letter since Giovanni died. Not notes or timelines. A letter of feeling. Dear Luca, I raised you with a love that asked for nothing but your honesty. You returned it with silence, signatures, and strategy. But you forgot that silence is my mother tongue. I have built entire lives from it. Do not mistake my age for absence. Your mother, Delia. I sealed the letter and gave it to the evening nurse with a calm smile. Please add this to tomorrow's outgoing post. She nodded, her eyes darting over my face. People had started to look at me differently, like they weren't sure if I was fragile porcelain or a sharpened shard. That distinction mattered. The next morning, Elsa sat up in bed and motioned for me to come closer. It was the first time she had voluntarily spoken in weeks. Do you want me to fetch the nurse? I asked gently. She shook her head. Instead, she placed something in my hand, a folded slip of paper. On it was a name and number. My niece, she whispered, voice dry like paper, rubbed together. Call her if they try to move me. I closed my hand around the note and nodded. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were protecting. That afternoon, a letter arrived for me. Official, sealed, thick envelope. Inside was a notarized response. The Ombudsman's office had received my complaint and was opening an emergency inquiry. They had flagged the property sale, frozen the listing, and issued a hold on all funds related to the account in question. The ink on my rage had finally dried into law. I returned to my room and sat on my bed. My hands cupped the scarf around my neck. Not for warmth, but for the weight it carried. Then, I laughed. It wasn't bitterness. It was disbelief that something as ancient as a mother's voice still had power in a world of passwords and paper trails. But it did. It always did. 3 days passed before the story reached the papers. Not the front page, of course. Not yet. But enough. A tucked-away column in the local section of La Voce Fiorentina. Ombudsman flags potential elder property fraud. Family dispute over historic Florence home under review. My name wasn't mentioned. Neither was Luca's, but the address was unmistakable. Anyone who knew our family, our street, would recognize it. Recognition is a funny thing. For months, I was invisible, a silent room in a home they thought they owned. And now, suddenly, they couldn't scrub me from the story, even if they tried. The morning the paper arrived, I asked Pietro, the mail assistant, if I could keep a second copy. He handed it over with a curious glance. You like the classifieds, signora? I smiled. Only when they classify the truth. He chuckled, but didn't press. Back in my room, I clipped the article out with embroidery scissors and pinned it to my corkboard. Just below it, I added a yellow sticky note in all caps. I remember who I am. Elsa looked up from her bed and smiled. Not a full one, but real. Later that day, I walked slowly through the lounge. Staff watched me now, the way people watch a storm approach over still water, careful not to blink. In the hallway near the activities office, a voice called out, Delia. I turned. It was Antonella, the head administrator. She rarely left her office. Would you come in for a moment? She asked, motioning gently. I nodded and followed her. Her office smelled like lemon polish and something stale beneath it. Folders were stacked high, but neatly, as if disorder were a disease she'd long since eradicated. She gestured for me to sit. I wanted to check in, she said, choosing her words as if they were landmines. We've been made aware that there are some legal proceedings surrounding your family home. I know, I replied. She glanced down at a paper. It appears you may be entitled to representation. Has anyone visited to provide legal counsel? Yes. A pause. Do you feel safe here, Delia? It was an honest question, but the wrong one. Safe enough, I said, but I'd like to begin planning my discharge. She blinked. You're aware that your care plan. I am, I said, leaning forward. And I know the law allows me to petition for release once cognitive capacity has been demonstrated. I've made the request. Your records confirm it. Her throat moved visibly as she swallowed. You're very informed. I had time, I replied. A lot of it. She leaned back. The evaluation's been approved. Friday, I nodded. Then I'll be ready. Back in my room, I opened my drawer and removed a folder marked painting supplies. Inside were not brushes or pastels, but bank documents Marella had mailed me. showing Luca's name on withdrawal slips, ones dated before the sale was finalized. He hadn't waited for the ink to dry before he started emptying the account. I made photocopies in the lounge, when no one was looking. The originals I placed inside a box of decoupage materials, the box labeled for community display, summer art showcase. It would be hard to claim I was confused while submitting forensic-grade evidence under lavender-scented Mod Podge. That evening, Kiara called the facility. She didn't ask for me. She asked for Elsa. A nurse told me, in passing. "Strange," she said. "Your daughter-in-law asked to speak to your roommate. Claimed she wanted to know if you were sleeping well." I stared. Elsa's eyes were wide when I returned. "She spoke to you?" I asked quietly. Elsa nodded. "What did she say?" Elsa wrote on a piece of scrap paper with trembling fingers. "She told me you're not well, asked if I'd noticed signs." I folded the paper and tucked it under my scarf. "She's afraid," I said. Elsa blinked slowly, and then more deliberate than before, she tilted her head toward my corkboard, toward the clipped article. She was reminding me, so are they. The next morning, I walked into art therapy and asked for cardboard and acrylics. "I thought you preferred watercolors," the therapist said. "I'm trying something permanent," I said. On a piece of thick matte board, I painted a silhouette of a woman seated with her back turned toward a house, but where her heart would be, I painted an open ledger. Names flowed out from it, like leaves. Chiara, Luca, Giovanni, me. Beneath it, I wrote one phrase: "Home is not where they remember you, it's where you remember yourself." The therapist watched in silence as I painted. "May I hang this in the common room?" I asked afterward. She nodded. Of course. She didn't realize I'd embedded another USB inside the frame's backing. They thought art therapy was for healing. Mine was for holding power. That night, I didn't write in my sketchbook. I didn't need to. My legacy had begun to speak louder than my silence ever did. On Friday morning, I woke before dawn. The sky outside was ink and silence, unbroken by birds or breeze. I rose carefully, letting the cold tiles ground me. My scarf slipped through my fingers as I reached for it, the fabric soft, weighted by every hidden layer stitched into it. Today was the day of the evaluation. It was strange to prepare for something that had been used as a threat for so long. For months, they'd leaned on the idea that I was unstable, confused, declining. But now, all their whispers would be tested. And I had never felt clearer. I dressed with ritual precision, charcoal knit, apron worn like armor, scarf knotted deliberately, its embroidered edge tucked under the collarbone. Then I smoothed my hands over my hips and faced the mirror. My eyes didn't flinch. They were the same eyes that watched my husband bury his father, that held Luca the first time he opened his hand to grab mine. The same eyes that closed as I signed my marriage license. The same eyes that opened alone decades later. I was ready. Antonella met me, near the elevator. She wore perfume this time. "Dr. Ferretti will see you in the south wing," she said, voice neutral, controlled. I nodded and followed her down the hall. As we walked, residents glanced up from their newspapers and puzzles. Some smiled, some didn't. I didn't need them to know my name, just that it mattered. The room they chose was plain. A wooden table, 2 chairs, a pitcher of water, and a large window, letting in the kind of light that forces you to squint even when the sky is cloudy. Dr. Ferretti was already seated. He was younger than I expected. Late 40s maybe, crisp collar, leather shoes, and an expression that gave nothing away. "Signora Bianchi," he greeted. I sat. "Doctor." He flipped open a manila folder. "Cognitive reassessment, per your request." "I trust it will be thorough," I said. "It always is." The first part was standard: memory recall, pattern tests, clock drawings. Then came the abstract ones. He asked me to interpret metaphors, to explain emotional states in strangers' expressions. Then came questions about dates, time orientation, famous figures, sequencing. I passed each one deliberately, not quickly, but without hesitation. Finally, he closed the folder. "Tell me, Delia, why now? Why request this evaluation?" I looked at him carefully, because memory matters, and I refuse to let mine be rewritten by people who find it inconvenient. He held my gaze. "Do you believe someone is trying to do that?" "I don't believe it, doctor," I've proven it. I removed a folded letter from my apron, one Morella had prepared, and placed it on the table. It includes the Ombudsman's report, a copy of the title freeze, and transcripts of conversations that support undue influence. I included it not to persuade you of my capacity, but to show you how much effort I've spent proving it to others. He didn't touch the envelope. Not yet. You realize that most residents don't pursue legal recourse while in care. I'm not most residents. He smiled faintly. So I've heard. He stood. That will be all for now. The full report will be filed within 48 hours, and a summary will be shared with the administrator. I rose. And with me? Of course, he said. It's your mind after all. I thanked him and turned back toward the hall. As I passed through the doors, I saw Chiara, standing in the lobby, hair pinned, lips painted, heels loud. She looked at me like I'd appeared from fog. Her expression shifted, first surprise, then irritation, then a smile too late to be genuine. Mama Delia, she said, they didn't tell me you were walking about. How was your appointment? I stopped. Successful. Oh? She laughed. Good. It's good to stay busy. I said nothing. She stepped closer, her voice lowering. You're making a spectacle of this. The paper, the investigation, it's embarrassing. Truth tends to be, I replied. You're hurting your family. You did that already, I said. She paused. Luca says, if you just step back quietly, things can still be resolved without too much mess. Mess, I repeated. I reached into my scarf and pulled out a flash drive. Then here's the broom. I dropped it into her hand. She looked at it as if it were venomous. You've kept everything, haven't you? She asked, voice hollow. Everything that mattered, I said. Then I walked past her. I didn't look back. Back in my room, Elsa handed me a folded slip of paper. Another number, another name. Retired judge, she said with a sly grin. Her voice was coming back now, soft, scratchy, but present. Friend of your family? I asked. She shook her head. Friend of justice. We both laughed. And it wasn't bitter. Later, I stared out the window as the sky finally broke open. Rain swept across the glass, sudden and cleansing. It didn't matter what Luca or Chiara did next. They couldn't erase what had already been declared. The clouds could come, but so would the report, and I would be ready. On Sunday morning, the South Wing buzzed with rumors. Word travels strangely in places like this, faster through glances than voices, more accurately in the silences between routine. I felt it before I knew it. Something had changed. Just before breakfast, Antonella knocked gently on my door. She didn't step inside. The results from Dr. Ferretti's evaluation arrived. I have them at the front desk when you're ready. I nodded, heart steady. She looked at me for a moment, something like apology flickering behind her glasses. You should read it privately. I wrapped my scarf once more around my neck, not for comfort, but for ceremony. Then I followed her down the corridor. The folder was waiting, sealed in a large envelope with my name handwritten across the front in blue ink. No doctor's seal, no dramatic red stamp, just that soft blue curve of my name. I took it with both hands and returned to the courtyard alone. The bench by the fountain had become my anchor. I sat, opened it. Summary. Signora Delia Bianchi demonstrates no signs of cognitive impairment. Emotional state is stable. Judgment, insight, memory, and executive functioning fall within normal range for her age. Recommendation. Immediate review of current custodial placement and transition planning for independent living, if desired. I exhaled, slow and complete. I hadn't realized how tightly I'd been holding my breath, not just for this week, but for the months and months that had eroded my name like rain on stone. It was official. I was sound, documented, verified, and now, undeniable. By lunch, the copy was in Antonella's hands. We'll begin discharge proceedings, she said, tone cautious. There's protocol, but with this and your pending property case. There's no pending about it, I interrupted gently. The judge ruled in my favor this morning. Morella forwarded me the official email. Her eyes widened slightly. He ruled already? He called it an abuse of guardianship and breach of fiduciary duty. I let the words hang. Antonella swallowed. Then, it seems, everything's changed. No, I said, rising. Everything's been returned. I walked back to my room. Not one step felt unsteady. At mid-afternoon, Chiara came again. Uninvited. Unannounced. She walked straight through the main hallway, hips stiff, lips taut with that same smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Mama Delia," she said, "I just wanted to—" "You're here for the keys," I said. She blinked. "Sorry?" "You're here because you thought I'd be desperate. You thought I'd bargain." Chiara stood rigid. "I only came to talk. To apologize, perhaps. Luca's been under a lot of pressure. We both have. You know what grief does to people." I held up my hand. "Grief doesn't make thieves. Choice does." She stiffened. I reached into my apron pocket and pulled out a folded set of papers, the official verdict, the reinstated title, and a restraining notice barring any further access to the property until a court-appointed inspection was completed. She didn't take them. So I laid them on the table beside me, like playing cards. "You and Luca no longer have rights to my house," I said evenly. "And since it was never legally yours to begin with, you won't be given the courtesy of moving out yourselves." "You're evicting your own son?" Her voice cracked. "Theatrical." "I'm protecting my late husband's legacy from our son's wife," I replied. "I'll tell everyone," she hissed. "The neighbors, the family. You'll be painted as cruel and vengeful." "They already know," I said, nodding toward the newspaper clipping still pinned to my wall. "And they can see who filed first." Chiara's voice dropped to a whisper. "You'll die alone." I stared straight into her eyes. "I'd rather die alone in my own home," I said, "than be surrounded by people who erased me while I was still breathing." She backed away slowly. No more venom, only air. By the time she reached the doorway, her steps had lost their purpose. I didn't watch her go. Instead, I turned to Elsa. She'd been quiet the whole time, but now she looked at me with a gaze that shimmered, not with sympathy, but with understanding. "I wish I had done that," she said softly. "There's still time," I replied. She smiled. A small, real thing. Later that night, the rain came again. Not heavy this time, just gentle, like a rinsing of dust. I sat by the window with my sketchbook and drew what I hadn't dared draw until now, the house. But not as it was when I left it. As it should be. With open shutters, a flower pot on the sill, and a light burning behind the kitchen curtain. A place, not of memory, but of return. And this time, the key would be mine alone. I didn't leave the facility with a suitcase. I left with a cardboard box. Inside were 3 sketchbooks, one decoupage frame with hidden documents still nestled inside, the worn-out scarf Julia had embroidered when I was pregnant, and a sealed envelope addressed to Luca. The nurse who walked me out was young, no older than my grandson. She offered to carry the box, but I waved her off. "I need to feel it," I said. "The weight of everything I took back." She smiled softly and didn't press. The air outside was brisk, but not biting. Real air, open air. I hadn't breathed it, without supervision, for months. It carried the scent of soil, old rain, and the faint exhaust of a waiting taxi. All of it was beautiful. I stepped into the cab with no backward glance. Elsa had hugged me that morning. No tears, no words, just her wrinkled hand pressed over mine, and a nod. We had both survived something. As the cab rolled past the gates, the facility receded like a past life. I didn't cry. I had cried enough in places that claimed to protect me. Now I was going somewhere I chose. The ride was quiet. I didn't speak much. The driver had seen the headlines. I could tell by the way he glanced at me in the mirror, but he said nothing. When we turned onto Via Amedio, I recognized the rust-colored wall before the gate, the fig tree that still leaned toward the sun like an old gossip, and then the house. My house. Not reclaimed, not wrestled, mine. The shutters were closed, the mailbox was full, but it still stood like a memory that waited patiently for me to remember it aloud. I stepped out of the cab, thanked the driver, and turned the key. It stuck a little. But then it gave way, and just like that, I was inside. Dust lingered on every surface, yet the scent of lemon polish still whispered from somewhere deep. I left the box on the console table in the hallway and walked room by room, not to check what was missing, but to greet what remained. The painting of the Amalfi Coast still hung in the hallway, the one Giovanni had bought from a student artist because his cliffs looked honest. The tile in the kitchen was cracked, where Luca had once dropped a glass bowl, trying to surprise me with panna cotta. Even the indentation on the third step of the staircase, the one I always skipped with my right foot, was still there. These were not memories. They were proofs. In the upstairs bedroom, I opened the window and let light pour in. Dust swirled like glitter in the beam. I sat on the edge of the bed, peeled off my scarf, and let my head fall back against the headboard. I hadn't known I could still feel this kind of stillness. Not absence, but peace. Then I reached into the box and took out the envelope, addressed to Luca. I placed it on the bedside table. I wouldn't mail it. I wouldn't call. If he wanted answers, he'd have to knock on a door he no longer had a key to. And if he never did, that would be answer enough. By early afternoon, the cleaning service I had prearranged arrived. 2 women, one middle-aged, one younger, kind and careful. They didn't ask questions, just nodded when I said, "Only touch what I point to. Everything else stays." The house was mine again, but I didn't need it to be new. I needed it to be true. Later that evening, I walked out to the garden. The fig tree was thinner now, but still bore a few late fruit. The bench under the arbor had rust stains. A rake leaned against the fence, like someone meant to come back and never did. I sat on the bench and let the sun hit my shoulders. Birdsong filled the space where once only grief echoed. I thought about everything that had led here, how easily one could be erased if they stayed quiet long enough. How many women in rooms like mine hadn't had someone like Morella or Elsa or even a USB stick? I made a decision then. The house wouldn't just be for me. I would convert the downstairs guest room into a legal aid studio, just 2 chairs, a desk, and a cabinet with pre-labeled forms and sample letters. I'd offer help to those who hadn't found their voice yet. Not revenge. Remedy. Before sunset, I hung my painted silhouette in the kitchen where light hits in the morning. That woman, with the ledger heart, would watch over coffee pots and toast slices, not courtrooms. At twilight, I lit a candle on the windowsill. For Giovanni. For the version of me who once stood in this kitchen, wondering what silence would cost. Then I sat at the table, pulled out my sketchbook, and drew the house again. This time, I drew myself in the window, and I was smiling.